It's almost immediately after a Republican president was in office on September 11th, 2001. Congressional Republicans have insisted that keeping us safe is their paramount goal. Senator John McCain running for president briefly on the slogan, "Country First." But now, in our fourth story tonight, a remarkable new essay by 5 Republicans who have served the last 5 Republican presidents as Secretary of State is calling out today's Republicans, diplomatically of course, for not putting country first. What's at stake here? Whether terrorists might be able to get their hands on Russia's loose nukes. For the first time in decades, American inspectors are unable to verify the security of Russia's nuclear arsenal. President Obama signed the treaty known as New START this spring. It would allow U.S. inspections, but Senate Republicans have dragged out and blocked the ratification process that would make it law ever since it was passed. Republican Whip John Kyle, also lead negotiator on this issue, has had virtually every objection of his satisfied by the Obama administration, including billions more in spending on America's nuclear arsenal. So why the holdup still? Kyle told The Hill newspaper yesterday the issue is now tax cuts. Quote, if the taxes all can't be resolved and voted on and completed and spending for the government for the next 10 months completed by like next Monday, I don't know how there's enough time to complete START. This after every single Senate Republican already signed a letter saying they will block legislation until they get tax cuts for the rich. And treaties require more than just a majority. They require 2/3 support. Yesterday, former Senate Republican leader Howard Baker, also former Reagan chief of staff, wrote his own op-ed piece saying, quote, it's beyond me how anyone could conclude that refusing to ratify this inspection treaty would somehow enhance America's security. Any senator thinking seriously about the safety, security, and reliability of the U.S. nuclear arsenal should also be ready to ratify the New START treaty. Mr. Reagan's Secretary of State, George Shultz, one of 5 on record today with an op-ed of their own in the same vein. Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State for Mr. Nixon, who negotiated the first nuclear arms treaty with the Soviet Union. James Baker, Secretary of State under the first President Bush. Lawrence Eagleburger, serving in that same capacity and standing by to join us momentarily. And Colin Powell, who served all those Republican presidents except Nixon, and also served as Secretary of State under the second President Bush, explaining last night why all of these men have come forward to push for Senate action.
We as a group of Republican former Secretaries of State believe that this treaty is in the best interest of the United States of America. I fully support this treaty, and I hope that the Senate will give its advice and consent to the ratification of the treaty as soon as possible. And it's especially important because at the end of last year, we lost the verification system that we had under START 1. And this is the first time in all these years where we don't have these procedures in place. So we're not sure exactly what's going on within the Russian Federation.
As promised, now we're joined by former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger. Great thanks for your time tonight, sir.
My pleasure, sir.
Not that we are not delighted to have you, but did you ever think that you'd be appearing on this network urging Republicans to do what's right for national security by getting on board with this administration?
No, I've spent all day in nervousness looking in the mirror to figure out whether, in fact, I'm in the wrong mode or something here. But here I am. And I'm ready to go to war.
This is not just Russia's nukes that are involved, correct? Can you explain how this impacts our progress relative to nuclear materials in Iran and North Korea and Afghanistan?
Well, it is about Russia's nukes in a way, and that's the point you've already made, which is the verification aspect, in the sense that when the START treaty ended a year ago, more or less, when it ran out of gas, and we had to replace it, the fact of the matter is all this time's been taken before we could get something, and the reason that the verification is so important is it's the one way we knew how many nukes the Russians had, where they had them placed, and so forth. We've gone by now almost a year without being able to tell that. And in addition, we all are living in some terror, at least, that the some terrorist, one place or another, is going to end up getting a nuclear weapon, not necessarily from Russia. But if they get one, we are all in terrible trouble, and that's another reason for doing everything we can to lock down as many of these weapons as we can. And if we know where the Russians have theirs and how many they have, at least we can be confident that they're not ending up in the hands of a terrorist somewhere.
As you heard in that clip that we played, Secretary Powell urged ratification of the New START as soon as possible, and if it is as vital to our national security as he suggests and as you suggest. Is there any argument to be made that that it should not be ratified in this current lame duck session? I mean, if it's urgent, isn't it urgent as in this week?
Well, you're now asking one person who has a qualification to all of that, and I apologize to my colleagues who may have a more firm view than I don't want to, and you'll notice that in what we wrote, we said we weren't going to comment on when it should be done. I don't believe we should be jamming this thing. If there are enough questions that are asked on the part of senators, and they're not certain of some of the aspects of this thing, I think it would be a mistake to jam this down the throats of people in this lame duck session when they could look at it early next year with the new senators there as well and answer some questions if they needed to be answered. I would prefer to see it done now, I guess, in an abstract way, but not if it's going to lead to getting the backs up of some senators.
One senator said something that perhaps you are uniquely qualified to address this week. Senator Collins of Maine suggested that what would really help here would be if both Presidents Bush said ratify this thing and ratify this thing as quickly as possible. It's probably fairly understandable why neither one of them would want to take a public stance on this, but is there a way of them conveying support that would add to the Senate's sense of what to do here?
That's a very good question, and I can't answer it positively. I would suspect that, I may be wrong, but I should think that the first President Bush, at a minimum, ought to be willing to say something, and I would assume that the second President Bush would as well, unless there's some reason that having just left power, he doesn't want to get involved this time. But it does seem to me that it would help if, in fact, the two presidents could say something. But again, I think one of the things I think they will be careful about is this question of timing. I think they're going to be just as concerned as we were, and I am, about the question of pushing it too hard, too fast.
Lawrence Eagleberger.
But it is also, I have to make the concession that at the same time it is important that it get done as soon as possible.
Amen. Lawrence Eagleberger, former Secretary of State under President George H.W. Bush. Again, great thanks for your time this evening and for our previous interviews.
You're being very nice to this Republican. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't. That's not my first judgment. It's whether or not you're right, and you're absolutely right on this. Thank you kindly, sir.
Okay.